More than 500 years ago, a man sat down to write because his life had already been broken, not by failure in private, but by collapse in public. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli, and the year was 1513. He wasn't writing from a palace. He was writing from exile after arrest, torture, and political dismissal. And the first thing I want you to feel is this: he wrote The Prince while the world was teaching him how power actually works. Not the version people preach, the version people live. Florence had shifted. The Medici returned. The system he served moved on as if he never existed. If you've ever felt replaced overnight, this book starts there. If you've ever watched loyalty vanish when your position changes, this book starts there. If you've ever realized that being good doesn't always keep you safe, this book starts there. The Prince is often accused of being a book about cruelty. But the deeper truth is that it's a book about survival under pressure. It's a book about what happens after you win something. Because winning is loud, and keeping what you won is quiet, exhausting, and brutally technical. Italy at the time was fragmented. City-states fought like siblings who never forgave each other. Foreign powers moved in like predators. Alliances changed faster than promises could be remembered, and morality alone didn't stop conquest. So Machiavelli didn't write a book about ideal virtue. He wrote a book about reality. And reality is rarely polite. Now stay with me, because I'm not going to teach you history. I'm going to show you why this matters more in 2026 than most people realize. Because modern power isn't only political now. Power is in companies. Power is in platforms. Power is in audiences. Power is in reputation. Power is in your ability to hold ground while the world tests you. The Prince is not a book you read to feel inspired. It's a book you read to stop being surprised. And if you stop being surprised, you stop reacting. And when you stop reacting, you start designing. Let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever built something, your career, your brand, your team, and then felt the ground move under you? Have you ever noticed that the moment you rise, people's expectations multiply? Have you ever felt like your position made you a target? Machiavelli understood that feeling. He understood that the higher you stand, the more visible your weak points become. And that's where his first structural law begins. Power is harder to maintain than it is to obtain. Getting power can be dramatic. Keeping power is disciplined. Most people train for the climb. Very few train for the plateau. Because the plateau is where the tests begin. When a leader rises suddenly, supporters want rewards. Opponents wait for mistakes. Neutral people watch for signals. And the atmosphere changes instantly. So Machiavelli focuses on stabilization. Not popularity. Stabilization first. Because stability is what makes people hesitate before they challenge you. Popularity is fragile. Stability is durable. And in 2026, durability is rare. Modern leaders are trained to chase approval, to appear soft, to appear endlessly agreeable. But Machiavelli would ask a sharper question. Are you building a system people respect, or an image people consume? Because image can disappear in a week. Structure survives storms. This is why he talks about newly acquired states. People resist change, even when the old system was flawed. Not because they are evil. Because human beings fear uncertainty more than they fear discomfort. So if you take over a team, a company, a brand, an audience, expect resistance. Expect hesitation. Expect testing. And don't take it personally. It's psychology. Now here comes one of the hardest truths in the book. Human loyalty is often conditional. That doesn't mean people are monsters. It means incentives shape behavior. And if you ignore incentives, you build fragile leadership. People align when there's benefit, safety, meaning, or direction. When those disappear, many disappear too. That's why Machiavelli studies perception, because perception is how humans decide who is safe to follow. Reputation is armor. Once damaged, opportunists appear quickly. So he tells leaders to appear decisive, even when internally uncertain, because visible hesitation invites challenge, and challenges spread. Now we reach the famous line everyone misquotes, the love versus fear idea. People treat it like a villain's slogan, but Machiavelli is more precise than that. He says it is safer to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. Then he adds a detail most people ignore. Avoid being hated, fear without hatred, firmness without humiliation, strength without chaos. That nuance is the real lesson. Fear can stabilize, hatred destabilizes. Hatred creates desperate enemies. Desperate enemies do irrational damage. So Machiavelli isn't telling you to terrorize people. He's warning you not to build your leadership on fragile affection, because affection changes with mood, mood changes with conditions, and conditions change fast in 2026. In 2026, your reputation can shift in a weekend. A clip goes viral. A headline spreads. A rumor moves faster than truth. So you need stability, not emotional dependency. This leads to the next law. Cruelty must be calculated, not continuous. If harsh decisions must be made, make them swiftly and stop. Prolonged pain breeds resentment. Swift stabilization reduces long-term hostility. This isn't about harming people. It's about not dragging instability across time. Dragging instability makes people anxious. Anxiety makes people rebellious. Machiavelli also warns about indecision. Indecision is more dangerous than severity, because severity signals boundaries. Indecision signals weakness, and weakness invites testing. Testing invites fractures. Fractures invite collapse. This applies to rulers, but also to CEOs, founders, managers, parents, anyone leading anything. Now we enter a line that makes people uncomfortable, appear virtuous, but act strategically. If that line bothers you, that's normal, but listen carefully to what he's actually saying. Public virtue shapes public trust. Public trust stabilizes systems. So yes, virtue matters. But naive virtue can be exploited. Machiavelli doesn't reject morality. He rejects morality that collapses under pressure. He wants effectiveness, because ineffective goodness can become irresponsible leadership. Then he speaks about fortune, fortuna, not as magic, as unpredictability. Life is unstable. Markets shift, algorithms change, economies tighten, a scandal erupts, a competitor appears. Fortune floods like a river. Preparation builds the banks. Hope does not. That's why his law is simple. Fortune favors the prepared, not the hopeful. Now hear this in modern language. Preparation reduces panic. Panic creates mistakes. Mistakes create consequences. Consequences create regret. Prepared leaders avoid that spiral. This leads to threats. A ruler must eliminate threats early. Not because he loves conflict, because threats grow when ignored. Minor instability compounds. Small conspiracies evolve. Unaddressed resentment becomes organized resistance. In modern organizations, threats look like toxic culture, misaligned incentives, unresolved conflicts, silent sabotage. If you ignore them, they don't vanish, they mature. Machiavelli also insists on understanding people, not idealized people, real people, people who fear loss, people who crave recognition, people who want safety, people who want meaning. If you understand these drivers, you build alignment. If you ignore them, you create resistance. Now we reach dependency. He warns against mercenaries, because they fight for pay, not for principle. Modern version? Borrowed loyalty, outsourced commitment, temporary alliances. If your strength depends on unstable support, your leverage is fragile. True stability requires internal capability. Internal capability is slow to build, but once built, it changes everything. Then he speaks about foundations. Strong foundations prevent external manipulation. If internal order is weak, outsiders exploit fractures. That's true for nations, true for businesses, true for personal identity. Because when you are internally unstable, the world steers you easily. Then he warns about neutrality in crisis. Neutrality feels safe, but it can signal weakness. Weakness invites domination. In business, neutrality can mean refusing to choose a clear strategy. In leadership, neutrality can mean refusing to set standards. In relationships, neutrality can mean refusing to speak truth. The world respects clarity more than quiet avoidance. Now we reach adaptation. Rigid rulers collapse, flexible rulers endure. He compares survival to adjusting to terrain. If the environment changes, you change. Not because you are weak, because you are intelligent. Adaptation is not betrayal of principles. It is protection of outcomes. Then comes reputation compounding. A leader known for decisiveness builds momentum. A leader known for inconsistency loses trust. Consistency creates predictability. Predictability creates calm. Calm reduces rebellion. That is structural. Then he warns about distributed authority during instability. Power must be centralized during crisis, because distributed control during chaos creates confusion. Confusion invites rebellion. In modern terms, when things go wrong, someone must own the decision. Not forever. But during instability, clarity is medicine. Then comes legacy. Legacy requires calculated boldness, not recklessness, but decisive action aligned with preparation. Boldness at the right moment changes history. Boldness without structure becomes disaster. Now pause. Notice something. These laws don't celebrate cruelty. They celebrate structural awareness. Machiavelli is not cheering for evil. He is warning leaders about fragility. He is explaining why systems collapse, because he saw collapses up close. He saw rulers fall because they confused kindness with weakness. He saw states crumble because leaders avoided hard decisions. He saw power decay because stability was sacrificed for approval. And this is where 2026 enters like a spotlight. Modern leadership often prioritizes visibility over structure, popularity over discipline, performance over foundations. Machiavelli would predict collapse in such systems. He would say, "You're building a house of applause, not a house of stone. Now stay with me, because we're about to go deeper." The prince isn't only about controlling others, it is about controlling yourself under elevation. Power exposes character faster than poverty ever does. When you gain authority, your weaknesses amplify. Impatience becomes tyranny. Insecurity becomes paranoia. Ego becomes isolation. Machiavelli watched leaders self-destruct from inside, not because they lacked intelligence, because they lacked psychological discipline. This is where the book becomes personal. If you've ever been promoted and suddenly felt different inside, this part is for you. If you've ever gained attention and felt your emotions become louder, this part is for you. If you've ever felt pressure make you less patient, this part is for you. Machiavelli explains, conspiracies don't start with enemies. They start with dissatisfaction. People conspire when they feel wronged. They rebel when they feel unheard. They resist when they feel destabilized. So he advises leaders to reduce causes of hatred. Again, notice the precision. He doesn't say avoid fear. He says avoid hatred. Fear can stabilize. Hatred destabilizes. Hatred creates desperate revenge. In modern leadership, this means something practical. You can enforce standards without humiliating. You can correct without crushing dignity. You can demand excellence without provoking resentment. That balance is rare, and it's what separates strong leaders from insecure ones. Then he talks about generosity, and it surprises people. Why would generosity be dangerous? Because unsustainable generosity creates expectation. When expectation breaks, resentment forms. If you give too much early, you must later take back. Taking back damages perception. So he advises measured generosity. Sustainable authority, not dramatic benevolence. This is important in 2026 because modern brands overpromise, businesses overdiscount, leaders overcommit. Then reality arrives, and trust collapses. Machiavelli would say, don't build expectations you can't maintain. He also warns about pleasing everyone. Trying to please everyone dilutes authority. Authority requires hierarchy. Hierarchy requires clarity. Clarity requires decisions. If you constantly adjust to satisfy all sides, structure fractures. And fractured authority invites opportunists. Machiavelli returns to preparation again and again. He warns against complacency during peace. Peace is when leaders grow weak. They assume stability is permanent. They neglect readiness. But peace is only a pause between storms. In 2026, storms arrive as policy changes, market crashes, platform shifts, economic tightening, cultural mood swings. Prepared systems survive. Unprepared systems panic. Then he discusses military strength again, but read it structurally. Internal capability. If your authority depends on borrowed strength, you become hostage to it. If your business depends on unstable partners, you are vulnerable. If your influence depends on borrowed credibility, you are vulnerable. If your leadership depends on temporary alliances, you are vulnerable. True stability requires internal strength. He also warns about flatterers. This is painfully modern. Because in 2026, flatterers are everywhere. They are in your comments. They are in your meetings. They are in your circle. They feed your ego and make you blind. Blind leaders misjudge risk. Machiavelli advises selecting advisors who speak truth, but with structure. Too much advice creates confusion. Too little dissent creates illusion. Structured truth keeps leaders clear. Then comes the aspirational layer. Machiavelli admired unifiers. He wanted Italy strong. This reveals his heart. The prince is not pure darkness. It wants order. It wants coherence. It wants a stable system. But it understands stability requires strength, not wishful thinking. He warns against living on past glory. Inherited reputation fades if not renewed. Every generation tests authority again. Legacy without renewal weakens. Renewal requires vigilance. Vigilance requires awareness. Awareness requires humility. Humility prevents overconfidence. And overconfidence is the silent killer of power. In 2026, overconfidence looks like viral praise, rapid scaling, public validation, a sudden rise. And then the moment you believe you are safe, you stop preparing. Machiavelli would say, that's when decay begins. He addresses cruelty again, but clarifies it. Cruelty used once to stabilize may prevent chaos later. But repeated cruelty signals insecurity. Insecurity erodes respect. Respect stabilizes order. So firmness must be rare, measured, and purposeful. Not emotional. Not impulsive. Not revenge-based. Machiavelli despised impulsive violence. He valued controlled firmness. Then we reach deception and manipulation. People accuse him of teaching deception, but he teaches strategic communication. Revealing everything weakens positioning. Selective disclosure preserves advantage. This is true in negotiations, true in partnerships, true in markets, true in diplomacy. Transparency is not always strength. Sometimes controlled opacity protects stability. Now let's talk rebellion patterns. Rebellion often begins with elites, not masses. Discontented elites mobilize broader dissatisfaction. So leaders must manage internal power circles carefully, not through paranoia, through incentive alignment. When incentives align, rebellion weakens. When incentives fracture, instability grows. Machiavelli thinks in incentives, not vibes, not speeches, not hopes. Incentives shape loyalty. Modern organizations fail because incentives misalign. People are rewarded for short-term wins that damage long-term health. Teams compete internally instead of building unity. Machiavelli would call that self-destruction. He would identify cracks early. He would say collapse begins internally before it becomes visible externally. Then fortune returns again. But here he emphasizes boldness. Opportunity appears. Hesitation wastes momentum. Preparation enables decisive action. Decisive action creates psychological dominance. This connects perfectly to Sun Tzu. Preparation plus boldness creates inevitability. Now let me speak to you directly, not as a lecture, but as a warning and a gift. If you are building something in 2026, brand, company, platform, leadership, this book is not telling you to dominate people. It's telling you to understand power. Power is systemic. Structure requires clarity. Clarity requires discipline. Discipline requires internal control. Internal control is rare. That rarity is why most leaders fail. They seek admiration. Machiavelli seeks stability. They seek validation. He seeks durability. They seek applause. He seeks longevity. And longevity beats popularity every time. One of the deepest insights is this: fear is predictable. Love is volatile. Predictability stabilizes systems. Volatility destabilizes them. This doesn't mean you become cold. It means you reduce unpredictability in your leadership. Unpredictability creates anxiety. Anxiety fuels rebellion. Stability creates calm. Calm reinforces authority. Authority reduces resistance. He also emphasizes realism over idealism. Idealism without structure collapses under pressure. Realism prepares for resistance. Resistance is inevitable, so you plan for it. A wise leader expects betrayal not because everyone is evil, but because incentives change. When incentives change, loyalty shifts, so systems must be resilient. Then he talks about reputation timing. Act decisively early. Set direction clearly. Uncertainty at the beginning invites challenges. First impressions shape future resistance. Weak starts compound difficulty. Strong starts compound stability. This is true for new leaders, new channels, new brands, new eras. Now he also speaks about avoiding unnecessary wars. Conflict drains resources. Conflict reduces morale. Conflict exposes weakness. The best leaders don't fight everything. They position, they choose decisive moments. They maintain order without constant confrontation. Now we arrive at the emotional core. The Prince is not a book about cruelty. It is a book about responsibility under pressure. Leadership is heavy. Authority is fragile. Stability requires discipline. Discipline is uncomfortable. That discomfort is why many reject Machiavelli, because he removes illusions. He forces you to confront human nature without sentimentality. But sentimentality doesn't protect systems. Structure does. Now sit with this question. Where in your life are you building popularity instead of durability? Where are you reacting emotionally instead of designing structurally? Where are you chasing approval and calling it leadership? Where are you avoiding a hard decision that is quietly growing expensive? Machiavelli would not judge you. He would observe. He would recalibrate. He would design correction. Because at its core, The Prince is about correction. Correcting fragility. Correcting instability. Correcting illusion, replacing them with structure. In 2026, this matters more than ever. Information moves faster. Public perception shifts rapidly. Reputation can collapse overnight. But structural integrity still outlasts noise. Noise is temporary. Structure is durable. Durability compounds. Compounded durability becomes legacy. And legacy is what Machiavelli ultimately wanted for Italy. Not chaos, not tyranny, unified strength. Strength restoring order. Order restoring stability. Stability restoring dignity. Dignity restoring identity. This is not darkness. This is responsibility. So when you close The Prince, don't close it emotionally. Close it strategically. Ask yourself what you must stabilize. Ask yourself what you must simplify. Ask yourself what you must stop chasing. Because power without structure collapses. Structure without discipline decays. Discipline without clarity confuses. Clarity without courage stagnates. But when all four align, authority stabilizes. And stabilized authority survives turbulence. That is the architecture Machiavelli mapped, not villainy. Architecture. And once you see it as architecture, this book stops being controversial. It becomes instructional. It becomes a mirror. It shows you where you are reactive, where you are structurally weak, where you are strategically naive, and where you must grow. If Sun Tzu taught you how to win before battle, Machiavelli teaches you how not to lose after victory. Together, they form a system. Strategy to gain, structure to maintain, discipline to endure, awareness to adapt. That is Sethtra Lab thinking, not surface reading, structural decoding. And now, when you hear the name Machiavelli, you won't just think dark. You'll think durability. Because the real lesson is simple. Leadership is not about being liked. It is about sustaining order, and sustaining order in a volatile world requires courage, calculated courage, measured strength, disciplined restraint, strategic visibility, relentless awareness. That is The Prince. And now it's yours.